Hi, and thank you for joining Chasing Energy. This is season 2, episode number 2. It's actually our 17th episode. I am Daniel Lucas. By day and by trade, I am a VP of Innovation. I spent a little over 10 years as an endurance athlete, and now my focus is giving you tips on mindset, training, and nutrition to fuel a life worth living. And what that means is having the energy and vitality to do the things you have obligations to do in terms of your work. You have your relationships in terms of your, parenting and your partner. And then you have your obligations that are social as well, or maybe your athletic pursuits, things that bring you balance. I want to help you have a better balance in your life. And that's what this show is about. With that being said, today our guest is Sherry Edwards. She runs a Instagram site and she has a website as well called Munchies and Micros. Her focus is Masters Athletes Nutrition. Now that's her niche, and we get into how she got started down that path. We get into fatigue in your 40s, trying to identify whether it's an external stress or the changes in your metabolism themselves. Sherry's approach is actually 90%, this is her words, 90% behavior training and habit training, which is really interesting to me because I thrive on identifying and optimizing your habits. It is a huge part of how I keep myself from falling off the wagon consistently. I have a lot of faults in my training, but falling off the wagon is something I generally don't struggle with. We get into some scientific studies, which I love science, and I don't often get to say studies or compare studies, and she's a good writer too. Please check out her blog, but she writes a couple of stories about some popcorn studies where they basically prove that people are eating the popcorn, even if it's very unflavorful, out of pure habit because it's sitting in front of them. So that the kind of takeaway there is you need to learn how to master your habits. It's going to affect your overall nutrition. Learning to be patient at 80% full. I give some tips about how I keep myself from overindulging. That is something I struggle with. When I start eating, I have a hard time putting a cap on it and saying you're 80% full. We talk about your physique versus athleticism, knowing how much body fat you need for your sport, what's optimal, and a big part is what is sustainable, meaning if you optimize for a particular event or race or picture shot, know what's sustainable for how long, because there's a lot of times when you're optimal where you can easily overdo that, get burnout or hurt. Sherry went from high intensity CrossFit type training. Now she does much more balanced weight training as well as a little bit of cardio. She has an interesting approach to how she kind of manages her energy level. I actually have kind of been experimenting with my own sort of strength training versus cardio and trying to figure out the right dynamic. One of the interesting takeaways is her sort of approach to something that gives her fulfillment emotionally, physically, and nutritionally, and all those things is having her own garden. I love the conversation around how she's passionate about growing her vegetables. And we even, in our pre-call, we had a discussion that a frost was coming. She had to sort of prepare for that. How she and her husband leverage accountability for each other with their fitness and nutrition. How they have different blind spots, but they both commit to show up. And then at the end of the interview, we digress a little bit into the fact that we both sort of struggle with ADHD. In fact, after the call, we had several colorful conversations about, how enlightening it is to hear how people have used ADHD to your advantage. You don't hear that very often. Mostly you hear people talk about the struggles with it and how they're on a particular medication or they can't do this or they can't do that. And yes, those things are true, by the way. I can speak firsthand to it, but what I can also say is there are advantages in there if you learn how to sort of tweak them. Sherry's Instagram and webpage are in the show notes, Munchies and Micros, and I hope you'll check them out. Follow her, give it a like. Please leave me a note if you enjoy this episode. My ask of you is take the time, if you haven't already, to leave a review. I read every single one, and it means so much to me, even when it's a critical review saying, you're not very good at this. Well, okay, well, at least tell me why, but I appreciate it. But I do enjoy the reviews, and I hope you enjoyed this. We've got several great interviews recorded that are coming your way. I'm going to try to release about one a week. It is a lot of work to edit these and put them together. Thank you for your time. Thank you for choosing to listen to this podcast. You have so many other podcasts looking at your phone going, what about me? What about me? What about me? Thank you for choosing this one, and I really hope to make it worth your while. Good morning, Sherry Edwards. Welcome to Chasing Energy.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me on.
I'm fortunate that I get to see your background here, but you've got the ukulele and then another instrument on the shelf over there. Do you play, or your husband, or your children, or all three,
Or how about
or are they just
none?
for looks?
None. Yeah. So, I mean, when I say do I play, I can probably play a few songs like Jason Mraz or like Somewhere Over the Rainbow, and I haven't played in months. So I probably don't play anymore.
Well, I play both of those, and my daughter and I, one of the first duets we used to do together was one of the Jason Mraz songs, Lucky. That
Okay.
one, yeah. A very good duet song with a male and a female. So your specialty slash niche is masters athletes, correct?
That's right.
And helping them to balance their nutrition, get it dialed in, get it right, which is a wonderful, wonderful service to the community because there's so much type of conflicting information out there and sometimes clarity, especially when it's the voice of experience. The first thing I want to ask you is, how did you get started in called into that community?
You mean specifically the masters community?
Yes, specifically the master's community.
I think it was more realizing that there was just such a need for it. That I think because both my husband and I were in our 40s, we've got kids that are kind of, growing up a little bit. We've got a son in high school and our little girl, she's 8, and kind of when life changes a little bit and you've kind of got a little bit more responsibilities and things kind of change in your life and your priorities are in a different place, you realize that your body starts to change. And it's not so much the physiological factors, it's just more your life circumstances change because you're a little bit busier, maybe you're sitting down a little bit more and you're a little bit more stressed. And I realized that people were often coming up to me and asking the same questions like, is it my metabolism that is slowing down? What is going on with my body? And I realized that that particular group of people needed a little bit more support. And I think
Hmm.
once you offer them the science, it empowers them with the decisions. Then you say, okay, this is the science. Your body isn't necessarily slowing down in its metabolism, but perhaps there's more stress around you. Perhaps a few things need to be adjusted. And once people understand them, you give them the power to make the decisions and the changes they need to make. And they see that it is possible and they can change things.
I like what you said about the stress there. There's a few things that triggered for me, but I will tell you this about stress. I don't know if you have this situation where you're in the Wales, correctly? Yeah, Wales. And but every now and then you'll be at a red light or something, and there'll be a gentleman or a lady talking to themselves out loud next to you, walking down the sidewalk, and I would just sort of looking at him, and I made the observation to my son about I was talking about how much more stress it is being an adult, and I said, you never see anyone under you don't see people under 40 talking to themselves. It's generally once you get to 40, you can't put those voices in a box anymore.
It just has to come out.
It has to come
Yeah.
out. So I said, and that's why I run. So one of the studies that I really liked that you had, because you do cite some science in your blog, which by the way, you're a good writer. I appreciate
Thank
that.
you.
Um, there there is this sort of dichotomy in the fitness community between being a very good athlete and being a good writer, and you seem to bridge that gap. Popcorn study, where you talked about the habit and the environment dictate the portion and the calories consumed.
Yeah.
I wanted to first of all, can you fill us in a little bit about that particular takeaway and what the study was about?
Yeah, so in kind of my field of work, like a lot of people think that it's all nutrition science, and actually, I'm going to say 90% of the stuff that I do is habit coaching and behavior coaching. So it's bringing people awareness of what is actually triggering their behaviors. So one of the studies was
Hmm.
that they had people go to a cinema, and before they went into the cinema, they gave them a bowl of popcorn. And what the people didn't know was the popcorn was super stale popcorn that had been out for a week. And before they let the people into the cinema, they had them fill out a questionnaire, and it was like, "Do you normally eat popcorn in the cinemas?" And some people would tick yes religiously, and some people were like, "Nah, not really." And so, they took the results, and then they'd send the people into the cinemas with a week-old stale popcorn, and I think it was a mixture of some fresh popcorn there as well. They took the results out, and it turns out that the people who said that they would religiously eat popcorn in the cinema, and it was just such an ingrained habit of theirs, turns out that they finished the entire box of popcorn regardless of how gross it tasted. So, these researchers took the information out and they're like, hang on a minute. We think that we eat as a result of flavor and texture, and we think that we eat because we actually enjoy the food. Turns out we're not actually as this opinion we have of things is not as accurate. So it turns out we actually eat as out of habit, not necessarily because we like the taste, we like the texture, because who actually likes stale popcorn? We are eating as a result of our habits. So they took the same thing now, they took the same experience and they said, okay, let's put popcorn in a situation where people wouldn't normally think to eat popcorn, and they took it in a meeting room. And they did the same thing. They did, have people fill out a questionnaire. And turns out people didn't eat as much popcorn because there isn't that association. So it's like, well, in a meeting room, I don't. Yeah. So there isn't that trigger that goes, oh, I'm sitting in a dark room and I'm watching a movie, therefore I need to eat popcorn. There wasn't that cue, as you said. So we actually eat out of habit more than taste.
I agree. And environment dictates a lot of that. I struggle with that sometimes when I turn. There was especially when I was an endurance athlete. Popcorn at night was my go-to to kind of hold me over. But there was some other popcorn studies that I'd read in the previous years that were very similar to that. One was they try to experiment with the size of the popcorn bucket they gave people, and what it turned out was they would eat relative to the size of the bucket, meaning if you gave them a bigger bucket, they would eat more popcorn. Yeah, and then there was another study where people were eating soup, and they didn't know this, but there was a pipe ran into their soup bowl, and so the soup would never end. It would just keep going, and they said just have as much soup as just eat enough, have as much soup as you want. And people would think, I'm going to finish this bowl, and it would be pumping it in. And the idea there is the more that is available there's this whole, I was raised, you never, ever leave food on the plate. You never get rid of food. And that type of scarcity that my parents were probably, it was ingrained into their head. It's actually works against us to some extent.
And I'm so glad that you brought that up, because as a nutrition coach now, I teach my kids the complete opposite, because I so strongly believe in teaching them to understand their own cues. Because, I think you and I were raised in the same, era where our parents like, eat every single thing off your plate. You have to eat everything off your plate. And now I say to my kids, if you're full, you do not have to eat it. I just ask that you do eat whole foods, and you don't go straight to the Doritos or the Oreos. You start with your vegetables and your protein, and you eat, whole foods first if you want to move on to the kind of fun foods. And I don't restrict the kids. I say you can have your sugar, you can have donuts, you can eat whatever within reason. But the goal is to always, don't force, I don't force my kids to clean everything off their plates, just because I don't want them to grow up being adults that feel the pressure of having to eat every single thing off their plates, therefore not noticing those physiological cues of, hang on a minute, I am actually full now.
Mm-hmm. How old are your kids?
11 and 8.
Okay. This is really interesting because I have one that's 11 and one that's 13, and I've raised another one that's younger. But when they get into the teenage age, my biggest concern when they're eating is they just want to go do something else. Like they were on the call with their friend and they got off the phone to come eat, so they're just going to wolf some food down. So I tell them, guys, you don't have to finish your food, but don't come back here in an hour and tell me you're hungry. That's my catch. And then you're going to go through the cupboard and just grab something because you realize you didn't eat half your food. So it goes back to environment there, Sherry. Their environment is, I'm distracted. I really don't want to have to eat. So one of the things that we just talked about was triggers, and one of my solutions, for example, is don't get ginormous plates. Use moderate sized plates, especially if you're making foods that are a little bit more rich. I tend to use smaller plates for that. And then the other thing, not that this podcast is about me, goodness gracious. The other thing I do is I snack while I'm making dinner on either like some olives. And I think I told you sauerkraut was
Yeah.
my new favorite treat pre-meal. But part of it, I'm just a natural faster. I've tried to get away from it, but I keep going back to it just because I enjoy going a while without food. What I have found, though, is that it is better for me to start snacking in the 10 or 15 minutes leading up to my first meal after 16, 17 hours without food. So eating a couple of olives and things like that, that's my cue to say, there's food coming, and this is going to help you digest it, as opposed, and you talk about this in a lot of your interviews, is when you're eating the actual meal, there's this satiety
Yeah.
gap, right? So tell us a little bit about how you talk your clients through knowing when they're 80% full and how to be patient with the food they've just eaten.
I mean, that's a skill I'm personally working on myself. So it takes a lot of practice, and it takes a lot of,
Let's see, I gave you some tips there,
takes a
Sherry.
lot of awareness. And when you're busy, like, a busy mom and a busy dad, and you've got work to do, and you just eat, you just walk away, you just don't think about it. But I think how I approach it with my clients is that you eat slow, right? If you eat slow and you have that mindfulness of what is going on between the moment you pick up your, knife, fork, spoon, whatever, and then you put food in your mouth, you slow the process down, and then your brain is therefore able to register and say, okay, there is now food going in my body. And what most people don't realize is that they think that, digestion happens in the stomach. It happens way before that. It actually happens in your nose. The moment you smell food, your body starts to prepare for digestion.
It starts for that. You can
That's
start with
right. It
seeing
starts
food.
with seeing food, because then your thought is going,
Yeah.
okay, I am now preparing my body for food. So you slow everything down. You eat really, really slowly. And it takes, I think it's something like 20 minutes for the time your brain to go, oh, actually, I've had enough nutrients in my body now. I need to stop. But if you're eating food and you're eating a humongous bowl of, something in 5 minutes, well, there's that massive gap that you've left with 15 minutes of your brain not even realizing they've eaten food. So you can continue to eat and eat and eat. So by slowing the process down, you could potentially quite easily get to that 80% full. And that's where kind of mindfulness and slow eating, all that is going to help you with digestion and not gaining weight or being able to maintain weight. Like, all of that is really basic but super important eating habits that most of us don't do in modern society. Yeah.
Okay. Well said. So on talking about diets, I was looking at one of your blogs about Magic Mike and how Tatum has he debated whether to take the
Yeah.
role because of the
Yeah.
diet that was involved, and that you sort of applauded him. I have to tell you, the question that I would get on a regular basis is, are you 3% body fat? To which, or I would say, that's absolutely ridiculous. It's a unsustainable goal. And then the other thing is that when people see these characters in movies, one of my favorite stories was actually similar to yours when I was trying to explain how much goes into that. And this was in, if I'm not mistaken, it was in a Muscle and Fitness magazine about a little over 10 years ago. But might have been Men's Health. But the man who played Superman, Calvin, I forgot his last name, but he played Superman. There was one scene in the first Superman where he took his shirt off. And the interview wasn't with him, it was with his nutrition coach. And they basically said, we had to starve him in the week leading up to that, to the point that when they shot that scene, he needed a day to get his energy back and start getting food back in his system. And that's where that's the reason that I say that is because when people see these movies, they think, oh, they look like that all the time. I'm going, it's I listen, guys, it's not sustainable. The thing that you see there, and then the other thing is that I think this is the case in Instagram a lot too, where if having this sort of movie body is doesn't necessarily mean that you have the ability to run well or do all these athletic things well. You can sculpt yourself really well. And when I was a big endurance athlete, there was a very big diminishing point of return, and I pushed against that point many times of how much muscle can I put on and still effectively compete at the 50-mile distance, the 100-mile distance, whatever. So, anything you want to add to that since I talked about it?
I totally second everything you just said there, that a person's physique doesn't necessarily reflect their athleticism. And there is this misunderstanding that because either a man or a woman, because they have six packs, means that they're fit. I have a lot of friends in the bodybuilding communities that are very open about their struggles when it comes to body dysmorphia or even performance. And they're like, yeah, when I get stage ready, I can barely stand up. I'm so tired, because they're literally eating so little food just so that they can be that shredded to be on stage. That is what they do, and that's fine. But then you get people that want to look that way and also perform well. So it's kind of trying to help people find that balance to say, okay, you can look the best version of yourself, but you also need to remember that, mass moves mass. So you have, I work with athletes in the strongman community as well that need to have a lot of body fat so that they can move things better. I work with people that are in the powerlifting community, CrossFitters. So different sports require a different amount of body fat for them to be able to perform very well. And I think it's just really important that people are more transparent about what they put out on social media, and to say, look, to look this way, I had to do X, Y, and Z. And here's the thing: some
Yeah.
people can achieve that. I don't want to just say it's all difficult to sustain, and some people can actually look that way. But that's genetics to play with. Do you know what I mean? Like if you're naturally lean, then it might be easy for
Yeah.
you, but for someone else, maybe not.
I don't think achievement was ever the thing. I think sustainability,
Yeah.
what can you sustain? And from an athletic perspective, I mean, look at Michael Phelps every year after the Olympics. I mean, he's completely burnt out. He doesn't even want to go in the water. He doesn't even want to talk about swimming because he's been doing it for so long, so much. Very good point. I think, if I recall correctly, the same thing happened after they filmed the movie 300. The gentleman who starred in that,
Butler.
Gerard Butler, I think, he
Yeah.
completely fell off the wagon and was just like, I'm
Yeah.
not touching another weight. To the point that I think when the movie came out, he went on Saturday Night Live and he did not look the same as he did in the movie. So you talk a lot about disordered eating habits and eating past full, blocking hunger cues, and focusing on how you look versus how you feel. These are all very, by the way, very mature insights that come with the master's sort of thing. Talk to me a little bit about, number one, how you're finding joy in your self improvement lately, because I'm going to lead into another question with that. So
How
let's start
I'm
with that.
personally finding joy in what I do.
In your own self improvement, what are some things that you've done recently that you've found joy in, whether it's a new form of training or a new type of
Or
food?
anything at all not related to trading. Actually, I very recently am becoming, I'm
Yeah.
going to use the word obsessed because it's becoming such a huge part of what I'm constantly thinking about now, is gardening. Like I just got a greenhouse, and I like yesterday it froze over, so now I'm like a little upset and a little bit anxious that my crops have died. And So this is kind of like the first real year where I have put everything out, like everything. Last year was when I really started getting into gardening, but this year is like I have everything in the ground. And it things froze over. It actually snowed overnight. So I'm like, oh no. And that's kind of a part of I kind of link that to what I value as well, teaching my children about whole foods and, like growing things and from like the
Yeah.
ground to your plate and all of that. But I find so much enjoyment in doing it to the point where like I have a little gym shed that's right next to my vegetable patch. So I'll do a few lifts and then I'll go check out my vegetable patch and see, oh, look, the lettuce is growing so well. So yeah, it is bringing me so much joy.
I think last time we talked, you were a
Yeah.
little worried about the freeze that was coming. So it sounds like it came. And you're right.
Yeah.
It really ties into your core values of, this is what I want. This is part of what I believe. This is what I want my kids to understand as a role model that I'm creating this food. And on the cover photo of your website, you're chopping with, you've got your nice, pretty wooden block. I'm kind of lazy. I mean, I'm a very serious home chef, but I use a plastic cutting board because I could
It's just
throw it in
easy.
the
Yeah.
dishwasher yeah. But I do like the look of those wooden ones. So the thing that I was leading up to was I wanted to ask you, number one, what is the biggest training difference that you've made for yourself in the last 6 months in terms of either how you train or an exercise you do that you have found that you were surprised by the amount of improvement
I
you saw?
went from high intensity training. So I did CrossFit for about six, almost 7 years. And when I say that, people are like, wow, you must be really good. I'm like, no. I was never competitive. I just did it because I really enjoyed it. And I liked the intensity of it and I liked the challenges. But I went from that. It is a
Community,
huge
it's a very
community.
big
Yeah.
community
I mean, I coach
as
a lot
well.
of
I mean,
coaches, so that's kind of like I'm still in touch with the people in the community, but I moved away from that kind of training and I started doing just lifting. I do some cardio because I obviously need to improve on my lung capacity. I can't just keep lifting, but I was always fast because I'm small. But now I'm kind of shifting that because I'm like, well, I didn't really want to be fast. I just wanted to be stronger. So I started moving the focus away from a little bit more the cardio, all of that, body weight exercises, and moving towards just strictly lifting. And I've noticed that it is making me so much more confident with how I handle myself around the barbell and, benching, that kind of stuff. And I am becoming so much more stronger.
okay. And how about nutritionally?
Nutritionally, I'm going to say, I don't think anything has changed in the last 6 months, but I'm going to say in the last 2 years, there's been a huge shift. And I think it's because I work with athletes and also because I'm still learning. Like, I'm on my level 2 training now and I'm just joined another academy. I'm constantly learning, constantly researching. And I think the biggest shift was, and this is what I coach people, is that you should be eating everything. You should have a very varied diet. And when I say a varied diet, I also mean you should have your burgers and donuts and pizzas because when people say varied, they hear it from a nutrition coach. They think, oh, she just means all the rainbows in the vegetables. Yes, I mean that too. But I also mean don't restrict. I mean that you should never feel guilty about wanting a donut. You should never feel guilty about wanting cookies because some days that's all you're going to want to eat, and that is okay. Ultimately, when people understand that you never have to give up food groups, it's like something just switches in their brain, and it's like you don't constantly want to just eat cookies every single day because all of a sudden it's in the okay list of things to eat. And it's like
Yeah.
your mind doesn't no longer has to constantly rebel against what it wants. So it's okay to eat the things that you want to eat within reason.
Absolutely. There's a there's a lot of science in that as well because if it's forbidden fruit, okay, it becomes the form of desire. And what I find is when it comes to diets that work, so much of that is, I would even say more so than genetics. It's more dependent on the person's personality. So almost like with religions, where there's certain religions that are all about the rules. You can't do this, but you can do that. You can't do this. And then there's some that have a lot of freedom in there for interpretation. with when it comes to people, I try to gauge, are you the kind of extreme binary person that is like, it's either this or it's either this. And if you give me a choice, I'm not going to be able to do that. I try for those people, I can understand, for example, strict vegans that go, no, I can't have the option of this. I cannot, if I have the option, it will not serve me. I'm somewhere where um, I, I try to be, I tell people the most disciplined person um, who is in charge of the diet should do the grocery shopping because if it goes in the cart, it goes in your belly. So it doesn't mean that, by the way, does not mean not to have pizza and things like that, but at least it's more of a conscious decision when it happens as opposed to the fact that, well, I just filled the cart with what was on sale. And let's be honest, processed and refined foods are very affordable, they're shelf stable, they're easy to stock, things like that. Shopping the perimeter, as they say, is to me, I understand why, especially people who are poverty, when it comes to poverty, it's so much cheaper to just buy a whole box of junk food at Walmart or something like that for a couple
Mm.
of bucks versus sitting down and preparing, a soup or something like that. So as far as personalities, that's one thing I wanted to ask you before we wrapped up. What type of gauge do you do on your clients' personalities to think about how is this going to work with them with the restrictions or how is it going to push them? I'll end that question by saying Dr. Stuart McGill, who he's very famous. He's called the back whisper, I think, because he was very famous for fixing athletes' backs. But he would say when he would meet with somebody, he would gauge their personality for the first few hours so that when he gave them a homework assignment and said, I want you to do this many minutes of bird dogs and this many minutes of crunches, he said, you have your extreme type A's who, whatever you tell them, they're going to do at least 20% more. And then you have the other ones who are like, what is the absolute minimum I have to do for you to not be
Yeah.
upset with me? So how do you sort of gauge that with your clients when it comes to homework?
I put them through like a little questionnaire, and it's kind of like the all or nothing mentality, and then the kind of continuum. So I am very type A personality, and I totally understand what it's like to default into that I have to do 120% because that's just the way that I am. And I feel like I should probably preface this with I am an adult living with ADHD, and that is literally my default. I was diagnosed at 21, and I'm like, this is just life for me. And I have made it work for me because I am extremely ambitious and very driven. And so I make my ADHD work for me. So I'm like literally always busy. But because of what I do for a living, I'm also very compassionate. And because I understand the psychology of it, just in the coaching that I do and the training that I've had as a nutrition coach, I understand that people can often slip into the all or nothing mentality. So basically, what I do is sit them down and say, look, there is a continuum. So if 10 is like 100% effort and one is like, I'm just going to sit on the sofa and not even bother listening to anything you have to say to me, can we be somewhere above a 5, but not maybe necessarily a 9? So can we maybe sit in like the 6, 7, or 8 zone? And what that might look like is, for example, if number 10 is like broccoli that I just cut straight out of my garden, and number 1 is like a deep fried Snickers bar. You don't have to eat a deep fried Snickers bar every single day, but you don't have to eat a raw broccoli every single day to see results either. So can you just kind of swing on this pendulum slightly between, maybe some days you want to eat a Snickers bar, and then maybe some days you want to eat some cauliflower, and or maybe some days you want to make your own pizza dough, so it's a little bit healthier. Can we live in the kind of gray zone so that it's not all or nothing? Because oftentimes what you see is people will go for the 10. They'll eat raw broccoli, brown rice, chicken, and we'll do that from Mondays through to Thursdays. And all of a sudden Friday comes around and they're like, oh, well, I've been thinking about brownies and donuts and pizza. So because I haven't had that, I'm going to eat that. And then once they feel like they've fallen off this wagon that didn't even exist in the first place, they can't get themselves back on, and so it's a yo-yo dieting all over again. So they start their diets on Monday, and then Friday they fall off, and then it repeats this whole cycle over and over again. So I'm like, okay, where we're going wrong is that we're going 100% for 4 days. How about we go 60% for 7 days and see where that takes us?
Yeah.
And it's getting people to come off of that black and white, all or nothing thought process that essentially keeps it a little bit more sustainable. So I don't know if I'm answering your question, but how do I gauge that is I think I introduced the idea of this continuum. It doesn't have to be 10 and it doesn't have to be 1. It's somewhere in between.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think the key word that either I imposed it or you did, but sustainable practices seems to be the theme of this conversation. The ADHD thing really sparked my interest because the best description I have ever heard of ADHD when I was taking a quiz, like, I don't know, 15 years ago, it said, here's the question it asked. Does it feel like when you're having a conversation that someone is playing with a radio next to you? And I was like, that's exactly what it is. I said, I have never heard a better description of what I experience with ADHD than someone playing with a radio while I'm trying to have a conversation. It's like I'm right here and someone's going. So I take very, very conscious efforts whenever I'm talking to somebody, whether it's on a date, when I'm with my kids, when I'm with my family. I don't have any TV on as like, if there's something on the background, I can't focus on the conversation. If I go to a restaurant, I always turn my back towards the TV because I'm like, I have to be absolutely focused on you. The way that it has served me, though, is I've always got to be going and doing. And I stay very, very busy. I generally, especially if it's just me, I don't even sit down for dinner. Like, I'll cook 25 minutes, make my meal, stand up and eat it, take 3 or 4 bites, and do the dishes.
Really?
Like between bites. Yeah. Yeah. But the glory there is that when I take the last bite, the kitchen's already completely clean and wiped down and everything. And it was mindful eating because I got to sit there and savor the bites and I wasn't rushing through it. Sherry?
I'm not sure about
tying
that,
it back
actually.
to you. Well, I'm enjoying it. I'm just going, wait a few minutes before you eat more, and I can get so much done. I've still got this apron on. And yeah. Anyways. Very good. Any last thing I want to ask before I leave, because this was one of the things on my mind. Your husband and you. How do you, in almost every relationship, especially if you're both healthy people, one of you has a blind spot that the other tends to feel, and probably in every relationship, but certainly from a health perspective. How do you two sort of support, encourage, or correct each other in terms of either your diet or your training? Are there certain ways that he holds you accountable or encourages you in ways that you do him? Is he worse at splurging that you kind of keep him on the path? How do you guys support each other and make each other better?
That is an excellent question. I think I'm not really sure in terms of nutrition and fitness how we do. I think we just hold each other accountable because we train together every day. I think that's how we hold each other accountable. Yeah,
You show up.
we do.
That's a big
But
one,
I
though.
think
You
in
show
terms
up.
of balancing out, like, day-to-day stuff, I think it works for us because we are so different. We're so, so different. Like, I'm, ADHD creative person, and he is really, really focused and doesn't say very much. Like, he's just like, I mean, we could not be more different. And I think because we are so different, we are the other person's blind spot, as you say. Like, we notice things that the other person isn't noticing. But in terms of nutrition and fitness, that's probably the only thing that we are very similar in. We just we have habits in place and we just do those things together. That's how we hold each other accountable, I guess. Yeah.
All right. So mutually beneficial habits and routines. You show up. And by showing up, you're setting the example that I'm willing to commit to this for the long term, as opposed to one of the big struggles I see in families is when one of them decides it's time to lose weight, but the rest of the family is like,
That's
we are
hard.
not on board with that. and it's very hard. And I those are the situations I really feel for the person. They're like, my wife makes really good food. I want to eat the food, and I don't want to have to show up with a salad every night at dinner, etc. So it sounds like you have a very good balance there. Where can people find you, Sherry, and learn more about you?
Well, I am I'm on Instagram. I live on Instagram, so I'm at Munchies and Macros, but with an underscore in between the words. And I can also be found at www.munchiesandmacros.com.
Yeah, it's a great
Thank
site.
you.
I'm looking at it now. Very, very great cover picture there with your plant and your cutting board and everything. Sherry, thank you so much for your
Thank you
time
so
today.
much
I
for having me.
appreciate it.
It's been really fun. Thank you.